All right, let's go ahead and get started. Again, good afternoon. My name is Curtis Johnson, and this is the session for supporting recruited athletes. I know we're running two sessions in tandem, one for supporting students in the visual arts. And so we hope you are at the correct session with us this afternoon. To get started, I'd love to give a shout out and thanks to Compass for sponsoring the new counselor webinar series. For our time today, of course, have my lovely colleague, Malika Lindsay, who will introduce herself shortly. Also want to introduce a guest, our guest of honor this afternoon, and a dear friend, a close friend of mine, Jeff Heisenrader, in the Swanee admission office, who has a lovely perspective from both the athletic side and admission side for our conversation. Jeff, would you please introduce more of yourself?
Yes, happy to. Thanks, Curtis, and thanks everybody for showing up today. Happy to be with you guys. Hopefully I can help out in your discernment of this topic. I am Jeff Heisenrader. I work here at Swanee. We're also known as the University of the South. Athletically, we're known as Swanee, though. I came here after spending 1 year after college working at Southern Methodist University as an intern, and I've been at Swanee since the summer of '91. So you can do the math, that's a really long time. In that time, spent 7 years working in admissions, but then transitioned over to the athletic department. I was a track and field athlete. I'm a graduate of Duke University. Was able to compete at the Division I level, which was an amazing experience for me. And so when I came to Swanee, I got involved with the track and field program. And after 7 years in admissions, I moved over and was the head track and field and cross country coach here at Swanee. Did that for 21 years. And then a really good friend of Curtis and mine who worked in the admissions office called me and asked if I'd be interested in transitioning back over. And so I've been back in the admissions office now for 4 years. The only other piece I'd throw in there is that I'm a father of two. We have two sons who both have fairly recently graduated from college. And our older son was a varsity athlete here at Swanee, stayed in town, and so was able to experience that recruiting process with him.
Awesome. He also has some professional experience in the recruitment industry, working as an assistant coach for NC State, and now, yeah, that's really cool too.
Yep.
So starting with some of the basics with recruiting, I want to introduce Malika, my colleague.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malika Lindsay. I'm the Director of College Counseling at Jackson Preparatory School in Flowood, Mississippi. This is my 30th year in our profession, and so hopefully I'm able to offer you a little bit of insight into some of the basics relating to what recruiting actually is and how it works. This will be repetitive for some of you. Some of you already know some of this. For others of you, this may be brand new. So hopefully we can share something that'll be helpful. There are three types of recruited athletes. There are recruits. Those are the students who potentially, at least in the NCAA, are potentially going to be offered scholarships and that kind of thing. There are preferred walk-ons. They can also potentially come in to some funds. And then there are walk-ons. Those are the students who, our slides just disappeared. I think Curtis just disappeared and he's got our slides. There you are, Curtis. Can you share your screen again? You're muted.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry about the technical issues here.
There it is. Okay. So there are various types of athletes. Though NCAA is not the only game in town, there is also NAIA. NCAA is the predominant or the dominant program or entity in the athletic space in colleges. So we're going to focus on the NCAA and their process. Division 1 and 2 recruits can get access to colleges and earn scholarships. Division 3 recruits gain access to an institution, but without athletic scholarship. They're certainly eligible for all sorts of other scholarships, merit awards, etc. And though it's in very tiny print, there's a statement at the bottom of this page that really sort of, if you get the slide deck later, is worth reading, because it's the Division 3 sort of statement that a student signs when they just agree to work or go to a Division 3 athletic program. So those principles are really admirable and important to know as we differentiate between divisions 1, 2, and 3. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of terms that get tossed around in this process, and I'm just going to go over a few of them with you. I hate to read from a slide, but a lot of this needs to be read directly to you. Qualifiers are students who are allowed to do everything. They can play, they can practice, they can receive money, all of the above. There are partial qualifiers. Those are students who might not compete for a team, but they are allowed to practice with the team and to potentially receive scholarship funds. There are non-qualifiers, and they're not earning scholarship, nor are they playing, but they're part of the team potentially at some point. But a non-qualifier doesn't play or participate with the team in their first year at all. That's not an option. An offer doesn't necessarily involve athletic scholarship. So a student can be offered a place on a team without money coming with it. So there are no guarantees of money when it comes to this process. And let me be clear, there are $3.8 billion in athletic scholarships annually that are distributed over 195,000 student athletes for the NCAA, but only about 2% of all student athletes are receiving scholarships. So it's important to have some perspective. As much as we care about our athletes and we think they're awesome, there is the opportunities are very narrow for them to potentially become scholarship athletes at the Division 1 or 2 level. Grants and financial aid can be similar for athletes as they are for a regular student. The National Letter of Intent is an agreement that a student signs, basically, and it commits them to the team for 1 year. That's at a Division 1 or Division 2 program. So the National Letter of Intent is not them signing their lives away. It's not a 4-year commitment. Certainly they hope to be able to play throughout their careers, but it's a 1-year commitment that they're making to the institution. And then there's often confusion about what a red shirt athlete is versus a gray shirt athlete. And there are a few other colors, but we're just going to focus on these two. The red shirt season, or the redshirt year, is when a college athlete elects to not compete in games against other teams. Although they cannot participate in outside competition during this time, the student athlete can still practice with the team. And a redshirt athlete might choose that path because they want to play for 5 years. They want to be a part of the team longer and extend their eligibility, basically, by having a redshirt year. Gray shirts are recruits who are offered a delayed scholarship. Essentially, gray shirts will postpone their enrollment until after the conclusion of the upcoming season. They will take classes, often as part-time students, but not officially join the program until the ensuing spring semester. So that's a very sort of narrow group of students. but important to have some sense of as you're talking to prospective student athletes. On the right side of the screen is just an example of the Division I worksheet. There's a worksheet for each division on the NCAA website, and I'm going to refer you to that website repeatedly as I wind up my presentation, my part of the presentation today. But there are numerous worksheets that are available to help you out at ncaa.org. So please explore that website after we do this presentation, because I think you'll get a lot of good information out of it. Next slide. So what is our role as college counselors? Sometimes we feel like we have to do everything. Sometimes we have no idea what we're supposed to do. So we've highlighted a few of the things we think are important. Obviously, helping students figure out their priorities. Is a student just trying to live the dream as far as they can? Are there real scholarship opportunities for them? Is their athletics a way into a school, a higher caliber school than they might have been able to get into on their own? There are lots of different sort of priorities in this process for families. It's important to be very clear about what those priorities are. Our job is to remind students to participate and do well in summer programs, meaning summer games, summer showcases, summer practices. Coaches are often watching during those summer programs, so it's really worthwhile to participate in those and encourage our students to, especially when they're doing both school athletics and club athletics, to do those kinds of programs. We want them to think and plan for their grades and testing, and coaches will ask for grades. This happens a lot at my school, and basically remember always that your student owns their grades. Because of FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, a student's grades belong to them. You cannot send transcripts off willy-nilly to colleges and university coaches just because they ask for them. You have to get express permission from the student to be able to do that. The NCAA has not updated their policy from last year relating to being test optional. So for now, standardized tests are not required of student athletes in the application process, but just be aware that that could change at any time, as we all saw 2 days ago with Dartmouth. Anything's possible with testing, so stay aware of that, and stay aware of the testing requirements for the school that students are applying to. Excuse me. Nothing is more important always than the transcript and the remind your student athletes, because oftentimes they can forget. There is one door to each college that they're considering. There's only one door, and that is the Office of Admissions door. They have to do an application to go to a college. It's just the way the thing works. And so, I've met several athletes who convince themselves that, oh no, the coach is taking care of that, I'm just going to go. And then they discover that they need to take care of doing an application. It's our job to work with athletic coaches and to counsel 9th and 10th graders specifically about the things that they can do relating to athletics. Students are encouraged at this point in history to register with the clearinghouse as early as 9th grade, the NCAA clearinghouse, and I'm sure Jeff and Curtis will share more about that as we move along. But the clearinghouse is basically the point of entry for students into NCAA athletics. It's our job to remind students to register and to do what's called the academic eligibility check. Remember the previous slide, there was a worksheet. When you go through that worksheet with the student, that's the academic eligibility check. And just make sure that if a student is borderline or on the bubble, that you're helping them. As independent schools, it's very seldom the case that we're going to have students who don't have all their T's crossed and I's dotted relating to what classes they need to have done. But it's just important to make sure you're on top of that. Connecting with school coaches, athletic director, depending on what your school's rules are, is important. and asking who your competitive athletes are. I'm never as unsettled as I am when I discover that a student is going to be a coach recruited athlete in the middle of, or the end of junior year. Hopefully I know that information much earlier. The most important resource that I can tell you as counselors to access is the NCAA Guide for High School Counselors. It's published every year, and it is incredibly useful, second only to the NCAA Guide for College-Bound Student Athletes. Both of those are readily available as PDFs on the NCAA website. Everything you need to know is in them. So please take advantage of the fact that they're free and available to you. And I would always make sure that you check with the schools that the student is applying to confirm whether or not they're test optional for scholarship, or test optional completely, or not test optional at all. These are all things that you really need to be on top of, especially with our student athletes. Next slide. And here's a potential timeline. I'm not going to read this to you guys, but it's a potential timeline for what junior and senior year can look like for different constituents in the process for student athletes. College coaches are doing their thing, and they're always going to be focused on meeting their interests and their needs for their institution and for their school. So they are, looking at kids and making potential offers to kids at various times and staying in contact with students. Students are communicating with colleges in all of the ways that they're allowed to. And coaches are often a great conduit between schools and college coaches about students' abilities and so on, because they can communicate. Club coaches can communicate too with high school coaches, just so that the whole team, but so that everyone involved in a student's process is properly informed and supportive. So that's my coverage. I'm going to pass this to Jeff, our expert in the room, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what student athletes should be expecting.
Thanks, Malika. I didn't mention earlier in my intro that one of my current roles is to act as the athletic liaison. So I had experience in track and field and cross country and recruiting, but now I work with all sports on our campus, and we have 24. So we pretty much offer just about every sport that the NCAA has available. Not exactly, but pretty close to that. But yeah, let's go through this slide. Myths and assumptions. I think this is a fascinating area within the world of athletic recruiting. There are assumptions that are made by every single category of person who is involved in this. And it's easy to just assume, I think, that what we're all seeing on TV for instance, what's in the media, whether it's ESPN or CBS or wherever, about what's happening at Alabama or Tennessee or North Carolina, that's how it works everywhere. I know that happens here all the time. Sewanee is an NCAA Division III institution, so we're one of the schools that doesn't offer athletic scholarships. But it's easy for parents and students and others involved to assume that the whole process is handled the same here, and it's just not. So we'll talk a little bit about that through this myths and assumptions. So number one, I will get an athletic scholarship, and that's kind of what Malika was talking about earlier. There are differences. And you might not think there are students that are being recruited by both Division I and II and Division III schools, but they are. Now, are Alabama and Sewanee going to be looking at the same football players? No, probably not. It's likely that those are different layers, different quality of athlete within the high school athletic pool. But there could be an assumption for students who are either being recruited by a Division I coach or Division III coach that the reason when the coach reaches out to them that they're automatically going to get an athletic scholarship. And depending on the sport, different sports have different numbers of scholarships. I believe right now in NCAA Division I football, they have 85 scholarships, whereas in Division I track and field, they have 18. And those 85 have to be individuals. You can't chop those up for football and track and field. You can divide 18, but that's a very different number. You might have a track and field team of 80 student athletes, but you only have 18 scholarships. So there are lots of, as Malika mentioned this, there are lots of people competing at Division I, Division II, Division III schools, especially Division III, and they don't have athletic scholarship. And that doesn't mean that there's not financial aid or merit scholarship available for those students to help, but it's very important to make sure that the student athlete understands when they're talking to a coach, don't make assumptions that there's a financial connection to the recruiting process. Most schools need to be very, very open, and our colleges are going to be open about that. But number two, Malika mentioned already, the coach told me I'm in. This is a time of year right now where we get a lot of calls from parents and students who are being recruited by our football coaches. And the timing of football is very different than other sports. Lacrosse, for instance, a lot of their recruiting activity is finished close to the end of the junior year. And many of those applicants are applying early decision to schools. And in football, some of those student athletes think their senior year is when they're going to break out. And that's when a Division I school is going to call me, and they don't have that season, but they still want to compete. So our coaches find those students and they say to them, hey, we want to have you on our team. I'm offering you a spot on my team. And so what happens in our office is we get calls from a parent typically saying, hey, the coach called. He said he's offered him a spot on the team. We want to know when he's going to get his admission decision. And that student hasn't even applied yet. So again, there's some miscommunication there, or assumptions being made. Malika mentioned this already. You still have to go through the application process. And there may be a process where the coach says to admissions, hey, I'm interested in this kid. And I've told them they have a spot on our team. Depending on the selectivity of the college, that student might get admitted. And at more selective colleges and universities, there's still a process and there's still negotiating happening between the coach and admissions. And so it's important to help the students and the parents understand that there's the communication with a coach, but there has to be the understanding that the admissions process has to happen. There are some communication confusions in there too, when a student is perhaps getting an indication that a school might be interested in them. And then this next line, it's March of my junior year, I'm being recruited to go to Harvard. Well, why would a student think that? Well, maybe they're at one of these summer camps and Harvard shows up to watch their team play. That coach probably has someone in mind on that team, but it might be somebody on the other team. But everyone on that team might think to themselves, there's a Harvard coach. He smiled at me, or she smiled at me after the game. Wow, I'm getting recruited. Or that person, I can see on my recruiting database, they looked at my profile. So I'm being recruited by Harvard now. And the myth and assumption there is that if that coach doesn't reach out directly to that student athlete, or sometimes parent, you cannot make that assumption based on assumption of that they're there for you, or they're looking at your profile. Sure, they looked at their profile. They might have moved on very quickly to somebody else. Same thing, the coach wrote me a letter. That means they want me. Depending on how coaches do things, they might be communicating by email, by mass email or mass text or mass communication, sending their brochures out or sending letters out, trying to gather information. And you think about a coach, there are lots of colleges out there. When I was starting my recruiting, I had sort of the dream team of our recruits. If I could get 5 of these 10 people for my cross-country team, wow, we're going to be really good, and then we'll win national championships in 3 years. But the reality was I had a pool of about 40. And so I might start with this top group, but I'm still recruiting that bottom group just in case. All of these top superstars end up going somewhere else. I still have to field a team. So I'm going farther down and farther down. But if I get those top 5, those people I was communicating with who are at the bottom of my list or bottom of a coach's list, suddenly I don't have a spot for them on the team. student athletes can ask those questions very clearly, and coaches will be honest. I would say most coaches are going to be very honest with them about where they sit in their recruiting list and what that letter meant or that point of contact meant, and where do they fit in their recruiting pool? Are they one of their top recruits, or are they a potential walk-on later on? The coach says apply ED. That means I'm on the team. Again, not necessarily. The coach might be saying to them, for instance, we fill our entire team in the early decision application round. And that's it. The schools that say that, Emory University is a really good example. I knew that track and field coach very well. And he would say, we're done after early decision. Emory is a very selective institution. People all over the country want to be there, and the student athletes are no different. And so he could count on getting all of his recruiting spots filled. But if he has 3 javelin thrower spots and he has 10 ED javelin applicants, or even worse, take track and field out of it. How about basketball? They're returning 15 players. They might have 3 or 4 spots on their team. He tells his recruits or her recruits, apply ED. That's really your best chance. Everybody gets in, and it's a pool of 10. Not all of those people have a chance. So again, you have to get into the very nitty-gritty with that coach. If you're counseling your students, and just find out where are they on that coach's list. Playing a college sport would just be just like playing a high school sport. In my coaching days, there were always conversations that happened in the first 2 weeks of the school year. So that's in the fall, and I was coaching cross country at that point. And someone would walk in and just say, I really didn't understand this. I thought that, practice wasn't necessarily going to be mandatory. And I could just say, wow, I have a conflict. I don't have to be at a competition, at a meet this weekend. I just didn't understand the commitment. There are some really clear similarities to a high school athletic experience and a college athletic experience. You have practice, but is practice mandatory? And I'd say for most high school sports, it is. You can't just skip practice and still be on the team. But there may be a layer of flexibility that's confusing to a student, where at the college level, it is a higher level of commitment. If you're a Division I and Division II school, and you're getting whether you're getting an athletic scholarship or you're not, one of the big differences is that your activities outside of that sport are going to be restricted. You can't just go to the coach and say, hey, I'm also involved in the theater department, and we've got that play this weekend. I can't make the game. That doesn't work. And that may be an obvious piece of information, but it's not necessarily that obvious to the student athlete when they're considering whether they want to compete at another level. And we have in Division III students who are considering all levels. That's one of our selling points, really, is that at a Division III school, it's likely a coach is going to be a little bit more flexible and open with that student athlete. Maybe not in missing competitions, but on a Tuesday afternoon, if they're working in theater and they need to practice, and they schedule a time, maybe that coach could have practice with that student athlete earlier in the day. There's some flexible elements like that could happen, but it's really important for them to understand that it's a higher level of commitment at the college level than at the high school level. I will automatically be NCAA eligible. It's just not the way it works. Malika mentioned the, I just forgot the name of it, but the
Clearinghouse.
Thank you. The clearinghouse that happens while they're high school student athletes. And then when you enroll at the college level, there's a whole series of events that happen every single year. Every athletic department has an eligibility office. They might be coaches at the Division III level who are managing that, but there's a process for students to remain eligible. There are requirements within the NCAA in terms of the number of courses you have to complete. You have to be a full-time student athlete, or full-time student, in order to compete or practice as a student athlete in the NCAA. There are great guides. Malika mentioned that. There's also a guide for recruited student athletes, both for when they're high school students and once they become college students. And you sign forms every single year. You'll sign eligibility forms as a student athlete. And those have to be completed. Some students think, oh, I just did that once and that's all I need to do. You have to walk through that process your whole time. This last one, I think, was one that I found I talked about a lot in my years as a coach, groups, also to high school coaches. The coach will find me, there's nothing that I need to do. And that's just not the case. If you're a college coach, if you're Alabama and Tennessee and Auburn, and we keep talking about that, the highest, the cream of the crop, they have a staff of 20 in their football staff, or maybe even more. They're going to find the people that they are interested in. That is true. When you start to go down really deeper into Division I and Division II and Division III, the coaching staffs just aren't big enough in order to know every good student athlete in the country. And they do as much as they can as coaches to find them. Malika mentioned coaches go to clinics, and that happens a lot. There's a summer clinic. Our soccer coach might go to Atlanta, sit for 3 days and watch soccer games. They have some recruits. They know they're looking, they're there to visit, but there's some others that are they might find out about there. But there's thousands of students there. And by the way, there's also a tournament going on in Albuquerque and in New England on that same weekend. They just can't know about everybody. And in my time as a coach, I always had the students that I found, but I was constantly amazed at the recruited student athletes that would just fall in my lap. Literally conference champions who I didn't know about. They weren't in our region. They weren't at a feeder school. And sometimes I paid a deposit and they would write me and say, hey, coach, I'm coming to Swanee. By the way, I ran a 155, 800 meters. And I'm like, where did this student come from? Students can reach out to coaches, and I encourage them to do that. When I'm talking to high school students, I'm just saying it doesn't hurt. Reach out to a coach. At the worst case scenario, they just ignore you and don't write back. That's a good indication. But you never know when you're the type of athlete or in a position or in an event in track and field or in swimming that they need. And you might think, well, I'm a female javelin thrower. Or how could they need me? You'd be surprised how many Division I teams do not have female javelin throwers, and they might like to just have somebody to develop. So reach out to coaches, and you can encourage students. They might say, I want to compete at college, but I don't think I'm good enough. Well, they're never going to know if they don't reach out and contact those coaches.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. This was just a short pool of some myths and assumptions, and I'm sure, we have a long list if we were maybe to survey the chat, and some additions here. I'm thinking about some of the things that you mentioned and highlighted, and really wanted to discuss maybe what an early read looks like for student athletes and families, and maybe a behind the scenes look into the conversation with the admission office and the coach, and then, that presentation with the coach and the athlete.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Malika might have some insight in this too, because I'm sure she's helping students who are coming to her office saying, hey, this coach wants me to send them my transcript. So we do have all my experience on this side of the bench or the desk is in admissions and athletics at the Division III level. And most schools like us, Division III teams are going to work with coaches very specifically and helping them identify students who are going to be admitted. They're the experts in deciding the talent level of the athlete and for their team. They have basic information about who potentially might be admitted, but they like to share transcripts with us so that we can help them discern, is this a student who potentially is going to be admitted or not? And this would be happening at all levels. Every admissions office is going to have an athletic liaison like myself. I've talked to the person, for instance, at Duke University. Their job is very different than my job on many levels, but on one level is not. They're talking to coaches. Coaches are sharing the names and the transcripts of their recruits. And the admissions office personnel, the athletic liaison, is helping discern, yes, this is someone who is going to be successful as a student here, and we can admit them. You can continue to recruit them. That doesn't always happen. I mean, we have 24 sports, and there are, in any given year, maybe 700 to 800 students within our applicant pool are recruited student athletes. And so they make some assumptions on some of them and don't necessarily run transcripts to the coach. For Division I and II, they've got scholarships. They're talking about that with their recruits. Not all of their recruits are getting athletic scholarships. So they might be having conversations about both need-based and merit-based aid that's available at their school. Very specifically here, we will do a pre-read both on the admissibility of a potential recruit based on their transcript, and in some cases their scores. The student might send us their SAT or ACT scores. And then there are schools like us who will also do well, I should back up. They're doing an admissibility read, and the admissions office also might give both the coach and the student athlete, recruited student athlete, an indication of what merit scholarship might be available. And we do that here at Sewanee. It's an incomplete review of that student's application, because all you have at that point is a transcript and potentially a score if they choose to include that. But we give them a range of merit scholarship. Okay, you're probably going to get some merit scholarship in this range. And mostly we do that to help recruit the student athletes and their parents decide, can I apply early decision to this institution? Does the financial part of it work out based on this kind of estimate from admissions? We log all of that into our system so that if that student becomes an applicant and they fill out an application and submit it and everything, that we will honor that pre-read. The number that we set or the range we set, we make sure they get a merit scholarship in that amount. Some schools will also say, if you complete the CSS profile, then we will also do a pre-read on potential need-based financial aid. So they might do the merit, they might do need, they might combine both of those to give the student and their parents some sort of indication of cost. Whether it's in general, we even have recruits now who will say, I'm interested, the coach is interested, they want to commit today, we're not going to release decisions for regular decisions until early March. But what would my merit scholarship look like? So we'll still help some families with that information now so that they can, if they want to go ahead and tell the coach, hey, I'm committed, they could do that.
Nice, thanks. Another piece that you mentioned sort of in closing here with the coaches finding me, but encouraging the student athletes to reach out to their respective sport coaches. And what came to mind are the prospect questionnaires, and how most often I'm directing student athletes who raise their hand like, yeah, Mr. Johnson, I'm still interested, although I haven't had any contact with any coaches. That's an avenue. What's some of the perhaps validity with those prospect questionnaires, right? Just because the communication and response can be different, and I know it's a sample size, but just curious on thoughts there with directing students to the prospect questionnaire.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think it probably varies pretty broadly by school, by sport, and by coach. You were talking about the validity of that. I mean, part of it is on the coach's shoulders to make sure that they're paying attention to the questionnaires. I would argue a really good coach is responding to all of them. But if you think about sports like tennis and golf, and you really need a handful of athletes on that team to, number one, field a team, or even number two, to potentially be competitive, and you might only have one coach. And so if you're a golf coach and you get 75 questionnaires a year, I would hope that coach is responding to all of them, but they may have to do some triage and decide there are some people I'm not going to respond to. And it's because I can, as a golf coach, go on Golf Stat and see that they're a 10 handicap. And that's just not someone who has a chance at all on my team. Now, again, it's my hope that they write that student athlete, the recruited student athlete, and tell them that. But it's a great way in my mind. Like, coaches are not always sitting at their phones. Sometimes coaches get overwhelmed by email because they get tons of emails. But the questionnaire is a good way to get your name and some statistics and potentially link a highlight video or a recruiting website or something that the student athlete, a recruited student athlete might have to send to the coach. So it varies by sport, but coaches in the athletic department at Swanee, most of them really appreciate that because, again, they might be looking all over the place. They've scoured everything. They've talked to high school coaches. They have all kinds of names, but there's just one kid sitting out there who they didn't know they had an interest in Swanee. And there's a connection to Swanee and they like their team and they fill out that questionnaire and you just, there they are. And you can initiate that communication with them. But if you don't hear, if this recruited student athlete does not hear back from the coach, I would actually make the assumption at that point that that coach, either that student athlete just doesn't have the option of competing on that team, or that's an indication of a layer of disorganization. You probably don't want to be on that team.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. I want to continue and make some additions to our conversation here before we open up Q&A. And so all sorts of acronyms within our profession, and NIL is probably one of the hottest topics here. So connecting with a friend who's director of NIL and strategic initiatives at a large D1 institution, I asked, hey, what are some quick facts that college counselors could know in perhaps supporting student athletes that could be having this conversation as well? And we know even NIL is sort of trickling down to high schools, and it depends on which state you're in or region of the country. And so just wanted to include this information here. Taking a holistic approach to NIL, essentially asking the student athlete to consider all the things that we do, and perhaps chasing the check, or thinking about all the things that the college or program has to offer. Again, not much different than the work that we do in advising particular institutions on a student's list, right? If they have this opportunity to earn something from their name or image, then it's a possibility to think more holistically. Another piece to this recruitment offering is thinking about the infrastructure that's on campus. Of course, right now within the Division I and Division II landscape, there's tons of promotion. More recently, even touring some small liberal arts schools who are Division III athletics, the conversation has creeped there too, as well. And perhaps another layer to that conversation for that student athlete through that recruitment process. Thinking about events, thinking about the resources that are available to access. And then finally, just a mention of, NIL value is really coming from the opportunity of what's happening in that sport competition, and to consider thinking about success as awards and honors, and which institution or opportunity could be important for you. So some real world advice from a friend who is deeply connected to the industry. And speaking of resources, here are some here. Malika mentioned earlier, NCAA.org, and being able to think about some of the documents that support high school counselors, some other publications here, and then of course the Eligibility Center. And you'll receive this slide deck later. I feel like maybe with the few minutes left that we have, want to thank y'all for your time here, but then open the floor for questions for myself, Malika, and our guest, Jeff here. You may submit questions via chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself. You know, I'm comfortable in silence. I know many of us may not be shy. And so want to be respectful of everyone's time. We will stay on a few extra minutes. However, if you feel that this has been worthwhile and you'd like to move to your next agenda item, our feelings won't be hurt. We appreciate the time shared with us.